gun law expert on the phone with us right now, Emily Taylor from U.S. Law Shield. And Emily, good morning. How are you? You're on the Talk of the Town.
Oh, good morning. I'm fine.
And obviously, gun conversation going to be prevalent, I think, throughout many news media outlets in our communities, amongst our political officials. Kirsten Gillibrand here in New York, one of our senior senators, bringing up the issue already yesterday. So I reached out to you and I asked you to clarify, and we talked a little bit about this on our show yesterday, not only with our sheriff, but again this morning with Public Information Officer from our own local police department here, Brian Coramato. Just wanted to get a breakdown of gun laws in New York State and maybe how they differ or coincide with other federal laws amongst the states. So if you want to break that down a little bit for us as we talk about the situation that unfolded here in Las Vegas.
Sure. Well, I can talk about federal law. I'm actually an attorney out of Texas, so that's my expertise. But the federal law interplays really significantly with state law. Now, for your state, you're going to be in a different situation than we are here in Texas. Of course, in Texas, the federal law is actually oftentimes stricter than the state law. State allows things that federal law does not. I would imagine you're in a different situation up there.
We are. We are.
Now, in terms of federal law and how that applies to the situation at hand, I think the conversation has revolved largely around fully automatic weapons.
Correct.
We've gotten some information very recently that, in fact, he did not have a fully automatic weapon. In fact, he was using bump stocks, which are not even classified as firearms. You can actually walk in, buy one, no background check required.
Can you give us an idea? Can you give us more details on what that type of weapon is?
Absolutely. So a bump stock is an accessory to be fashioned onto a semi-automatic rifle. And essentially what it does is create the situation using the recoil of the gun itself, in which you pull the trigger. And what's happening is the recoil is bouncing against the stock, against your chest, and in essence, the gun is then pulling its own trigger by the weight of the recoil and your finger, and it fires very rapidly and rhythmically, like you would hear in a fully automatic weapon.
So the difference between the fully automatic and the semi-automatic is holding the trigger down on an automatic weapon is all you need to do. With a semi-automatic, it would be as fast as you can pull the trigger with your finger. So you're saying here it's a mechanism that basically bypasses the use of your finger and allows you to fire that weapon quicker.
Yes, that's exactly right. And in fact, the ATF has looked at this device, and even though it does create rapid fire, because it is technically still one pull of the trigger to one round discharge from the firearm, it is not a fully automatic. It does not convert your weapon to a fully automatic weapon. In fact, when you buy one of these devices, you get a letter from the ATF stating this is a lawful device not regulated under the National Firearms Act, and that's how you know that you're within the law.
And so the device actually pulls the trigger? Is that what it is?
It's actually your finger pulling the trigger, but what the device does is use the recoil of the gun to bounce the gun back and forth in such a way that you feel as though you've only pulled the trigger once. But in practicality, you are pulling the trigger over and over again, but it's the bounce of the gun through the recoil that's causing that action.
The firing mechanism within the gun that's going back and forth, correct?
Exactly.
Right.
And you keep your finger on the trigger the whole time then?
The difference is instead of moving your finger to pull the trigger over and over and over again, the gun is moving itself into the trigger for you.
So is there any, as far as you've heard, is there anything in terms of the weapons that he's possessed that are illegal or some question over the legality of where he got them or how he got them?
And the amount of rounds, maybe, the amount of ammunition that he had.
No, there doesn't seem to be anything unlawful about his ownership, purchase, possession of any of these weapons.
Yeah, and at first report, I know at least this morning, one of the first reports that they were saying at least some, and I don't know if there's more coming in, as you just mentioned, that they were bought, illegally. He's gone through the required local, state, and federal background checks and procedures. All those were followed when purchasing these weapons. Now, Emily, you are a gun law expert. What do you see in most scenarios that you look at? Do you see it as a law-abiding citizen who purchased their weapons legally that come to you for help, or are you also working with individuals that have illegally possessed weapons? And what is your take on that as an expert in the gun law?
Our practice is almost universally legal gun owners who have used their firearm in self-defense.
Okay.
And there's a question about the legality of their action, maybe how reasonable it was to think that they were being attacked. But I have almost never in my own practice, and it's incredibly rare across the country to see this sort of act committed by someone who gave no indication that it was coming and was in lawful possession of firearms.
Can we back up? You are an attorney, is that it?
Yes, sir.
And you represent people who are accused of illegally using guns. Is that accurate?
Yes. In Texas, we have very strong self-defense laws, and it's all people who are accused of murder, of shooting someone who lived, and it's a question of whether or not it was in self-defense.
And strong support of the Second Amendment, I think, the use of those guns properly.
Absolutely.
Now, are any automatic rifles or automatic weapons legal under the federal law other than for law enforcement?
Yes, and that's something actually I've heard on several media outlets that they have gotten wrong. It is possible to own fully automatic weapons as a civilian in the United States. It's just difficult. There are two hurdles to overcome. One is regulatory. They are regulated under the National Firearms Act. You have to petition the federal government. You're looking at sending in your fingerprints, notifying the chief law enforcement agent in your county. You're probably going to have to create a trust in order to apply for this weapon. You're going to have to pay a tax, and you're looking at waiting probably a year or more for that permission.
And do you have
That's
to
the
give
first hurdle.
Do you have to give a reason for wanting it, or do you just, if you just pass the background check, then you would be eligible to receive that license?
You do not have to give a reason. Now, that could vary under state law because states also regulate these things, but the federal law does not require a reason. And most of the time, these are collectors.
Speaking with Emily Taylor, she is a gun law expert. She is an independent program attorney with U.S. Law Shield out of Texas. Emily, I asked this similar question to our public information officer from our local police department this morning, Brian Coromato. And, we're talking about this from, our professional standpoint, asking you questions and you're responding. But just as an everyday person and having knowledge of this and this, being your profession, I guess, when you walk into the office after you see something like this, what is the conversation? What is your thoughts? And what do you think the conversation should or could be going forward in regards to gun ownership?
Unfortunately, I think that we don't have good answers, and that's where our conversation lies in the office, because events like this are awful, and there should be a way to prevent them. There should be a way to stop them, but I don't know what those are. And the scary part to me is this gentleman, from what we know now, buying guns legally, no indication that there was any sort of history or affiliation or anything that would trigger law enforcement to look at him. The sheer number of guns in Texas, that's very typical. There are probably 19 guns in my house right now.
Right, and we had that same conversation with our sheriff yesterday. Those legal, law-abiding, gun owners, they typically have, more than one gun, and he pointed out there are, in his, and there weren't specific statistics, but he felt that there are more guns than people, obviously, in our county here.
And that would be, I think if you own one gun, or if you own more than one, you're probably likely to have a small arsenal because it's a hobby, it's a sport. There are lots of reasons that you want to expand your collection. And then I think the issue becomes, how do we prevent these sort of tragedies without stomping on the constitutional rights of good, law-abiding gun owners. And I don't have a good answer. And I don't think that expanding the federal law is the answer. I think that that's a way to sweep up good people in a net that is meant to, there are good intentions behind it, but I don't think that it's the right answer.
In Texas, can you have a handgun without a license?
Absolutely, yes.
And can you carry it in an open fashion? Can you wear a six gun around your waist in the community?
You have to have a license to carry openly, but you may have handguns in your home, in your vehicle, and in your place of business without a license.
Yep.
Emily, really appreciate a great job here this morning discussing just some of the issues regarding what transpired in Las Vegas, and love to have you back on the show anytime. Emily Taylor, she is a gun law expert and an independent program attorney with U.S. Law Shield. You want to check them out, uslawshield.com. Emily, again, thanks for joining us this morning.
Second Amendment advocates are celebrating last week's decision, but Emily Taylor with Texas Law Shield says they've kind of jumped the gun.
The district court hasn't even finished the case yet. And once they decide the case, then it'll go up on appeal back to the appellate court that just issued this opinion, and then potentially up to the Supreme Court.
All that could change, though, if President Trump signs national reciprocity into law.
It's going to put a lot of pressure on those states and the District of Columbia that are shall-issue states and make it difficult to get a handgun license.
Either way, Taylor believes the Supreme Court is still years away from hearing a case on concealed carry. Nick Grankovich, News Radio 740, KTRH.
In other news, we do want to report that the United Blood Services, 6930 West Charleston, that's 6930 West Charleston, they are filled up right now. So we've been told at KXNT that you have to go, if you're willing to give blood, to the Salvation Army at 35 West Owens. So the UBS, United Blood Services, at 6930 West Charleston Boulevard, full up right now. Go over to 35 West Owens to the Salvation Army if you would like to help out on that. Also, KXNT talked to Emily Taylor, who's a gun law expert. Here's what she had to say.
So long as they're semi-automatic rifles, you generally can walk into any gun store, any gun dealer, and you fill out what's called a Form 4473, and they run a instant background check. So long as you pass that background check, they will sell you the firearm. Now, there are some checks in place. Of course, if you don't pass the background check or if they see something that's unusual, they can delay the process for 3 days while they investigate you further. We also have mandatory reporting requirements that the federal government puts in place. So if an individual is essentially close to the border, there are several border states that are included in this equation, and they purchase more than one rifle within several days, it's actually a mandatory reporting requirement to the federal government.
So make sure you stick and stay with KXNT News throughout the day for the latest on the unfortunate tragedy and unfoldings at Mandalay Bay.